من المحيط الأطلسي إلى الخليج الفارسي كلنا عرب بنتكلم لغة عربية. هذه قوة يجب أن يعمل لها حساب.
What's happening, beautiful people, and welcome back to another episode of IJayReaction. Today we're gonna watch a historical documentary addressing the history of Iran's triple islands in the names of ابوموسی, Tombe Kuchak and Tombe Bozorg, located in Khalij Hamishe Fars, Persian Gulf forever. Before we proceed, I would like to thank the hardworking team of Deep Podcast for creating so many informative videos for us guys. بی نهایت سپاسگزارم از تیم زحمتکش و عزیز دیپ پادکست، به ویژه آرمان عزیز، برای ساختن این همه ویدیو مفید و زیبا برای ما. This is gonna be a long reaction video, and without further ado, let's get the ball rolling. And here we go.
Surely, all of us, Iranians, have heard many times in the media that the UAE claims ownership of three important and strategic islands of Iran, namely ابوموسی, the Great Tomb and the Small Tomb. In recent years, Arab countries in the Persian Gulf have given all the money to the media and other international organizations due to their great wealth. Why did they do this? Because they wanted to erase the historical name of the Persian Gulf and use the name of the Arabian Gulf instead. But if we go beyond the name of the Persian Gulf, when we take a look at the history of these countries in the Persian Gulf, we see that the founding date of these countries does not even reach half a century. So how can they claim ownership of the land of another country?
Hold on a second. The first person who invented this made-up title of Arabian Gulf is Gamal Abdel Nasser after he started his pan-Arabism policy, guys.
If the person who is watching this video is 50 years old, your age is more than the founding date of these countries. It means when you were born, these countries didn't not existed and they didn't even have a flag or territory. They were not yet officially recognized. Their land was not exactly clear. But the painful point here is that these countries currently claim ownership of some of Iran's land. Despite the fact that according to historical documents, these islands are an invaluable part of Iran's land, but sometimes this baseless claim is repeated by the UAE. Of course, the beginning of this conspiracy was formed in the region by the British in previous decades, and every now and then it is continued by the UAE. And this is what has caused Iran to be under pressure in the international arena.
All these kind of dirty policies and politics are originating from British guys.
Hello friends, welcome to video. Before getting into the issue of the three islands, I want to take a look at the history of these islands and see when the geographical maps were entered.
یه نکته هم خدمتتون بگم، ما 2 سال پیش یه ویدیو ساختیم در مورد جزایر آریانا و زرکوه. من لینکش رو در کامنت اول خدمتتون گذاشتم، فرصت کردید یه سر هم به اون ویدیو بزنید، نکات بسیار جالبی داره. منابع هم در توضیحات خدمتتون هست.
Let's not waste time and dive into the story of the three islands of Iran.
Buckle up guys, let's do it. Triple islands in the ancient time.
According to the evidence and documents obtained from the history of the Alamis, the history of these islands dates back to 5000 to 4500 BC. We made a video about the Alamis before. I put the link in the first comment of your service. The Alamis were in the region of Shush and were close to the Persian Gulf. For this reason, they gave a lot of importance to this region. The region was in the reach of their power. During this period, the southern coasts of the Persian Gulf to the coasts of the Sea of Makran were under the complete control of the Alamis. According to the documents, 5,000 years before the birth of Christ, the island of ابوموسی was part of Iran's peninsula and was ruled by the Iranians. The Alamis also had the island of Bahrain under their control at that time, but they usually consider the history of the Persian Gulf to be from the time of the Mads. During the Mads, a central government was formed and the king of the Mads, Diakon,
King
chose
Diako.
the city of Hekmatana or
Median Empire.
Hamedaniamruzi as the first capital. The Mads government also gave a lot of importance to the southern part of Iran. During the rule of Hovakshatra, the greatness and power of the Mads reached its peak. The peninsula of the Mads in the south reached the shores of the Persian Gulf. During Hovakshatra, the island of ابوموسی and the rest of Algeria were part of the 14th satrap of the Mads. A satrap named Oranjani, which is now approximately Sistan and Baluchistan. After the Mads, the Hakamonetians came to power. They created an empire in some parts of the world that,
Achaemenid empires.
until then, had not seen the light of day. Their empire covered the west of Asia, the south of Eastern Europe, and the north of Africa. During this period, the Black Sea, the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean were under the rule of the Hakamonetians. King Bahar has a famous poem in this regard. This is the same country where, in the story of Bini, Darius is the commander-in-chief from Egypt, Punjab. According to Darius the Great, the Sea of the Hakamonetians, Salak, after exploring the islands of the Persian Gulf, crosses the Gormuz Strait and then enters the Red Sea. From there, it goes to Egypt and then enters the Libyan Sea through the Mediterranean Sea. This sea journey had discoveries that had never been seen before. During these conquests, they built a waterway to connect the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. From this waterway, the Suez Canal was established years later. The purpose of Darius was not only to expand his pen, but he also intended to open the sea routes for merchants, so that they could reach the international ports more quickly. There was a lot of demand for Iranian soil. All kinds of facilities were introduced into Iran, and with these facilities, the Hakamonetians conquered the Persian Gulf region. During Darius the Great, the Kharis system, or Khanate, was established in southern Iran, and people had no problem with irrigation in southern Iran. Even earlier, during the Quraysh-Kabir era, this irrigation system was established in Oman. What may not be believable is that this issue also occurred in the history of Oman. And the Oman people also compared the historical irrigation system of this country to the Great Quraysh era. According to the 6th century BC, ابوموسی Island and a few other islands were part of the Persian capital. Overall, during the Hakamonetian era, all the provinces and islands of the Persian Gulf were under the influence of Iran. This is also from the Hakamonetian era, which was completely clear that the southern islands of Iran were under the control of the central government. Now we come to the Ashkanian era. During the Ashkanian era, the coasts of both sides of the Persian Gulf and its islands were part of Iranian soil. The Parthians set up fortifications in the south and north of the Persian Gulf. They had an eye on the coastline, and the preservation of the security of the trade routes was one of the important goals of the Ashkanians. One of the main reasons for the wars between Iran and the Romans was that the Romans intended to gain access to the Persian Gulf and warm waters, and to attack their trade routes from the Persian Gulf, which was the closest route between the Roman Empire and the Far East. However, they always faced the resistance of the Ashkanians and never achieved this goal.
Roman Empire never defeated
The Persian
Ashkanians.
Gulf was the heart of the Ashkanian Empire and was their trading and military base. We reach the Sassanid era. In modern history, the commander of Bahrain, Satran, was not ready to follow the Sassanid base of Ardashir Babakan, like other Iranian commanders living in the southern Persian Gulf. As a result, Ardashir Babakan, along with his son Shapur, was ready to enter Bahrain with warships. Satran, because he did not see the flame of resistance in him, took refuge in a fortified castle. But after a year of siege, Ardashir conquered the castle and killed Satran. Ardashir Babakan returned to Persia, but gave the order to his son Shapur to stay in Bahrain. Shapur also built a city in Bahrain called Tan Ardashir. According to the history of Tabari and the history of Yaqubi, all over the Persian Gulf, including Oman, which at that time was called Mazan, were part of the land of Iran. The waters of the Oman Sea, the Red Sea and Yemen were under the influence of the Sassanid rule. It was during the time of Anushiravan that Yemen was occupied by Abraha, the leader of Hawasha. As a result, Soif ibn Zizna, the king of Farari, asked Anushiravan for help. Anushiravan also sent an army to Yemen. This army was defeated and Yemen was liberated. The son of Soif, through Anushiravan, became the king of Yemen. The elders of Yemen praised Anushiravan's work and wrote very beautiful poems for his victory. Khosrow Anushiravan, in order to cut off Iran's sovereignty in the southern islands of the Persian Gulf, he completely overthrew the old government system. And a new organization, under the leadership of two layers of military and landowners, emerged. These two layers took their orders from the government of Oman. Oman also knew itself as part of the central government of Iran. Overall, during the reign of the Shia, Ashkani and Sassanid emperors, Iran's sovereignty on both sides of the Persian Gulf and its islands. The Persian Gulf at that time was known as the Iranian Sea. And it was not a strange thing, because at that time the Mediterranean Sea was also known as the Roman Sea.
Totally understandable.
At that time, the regime and security system was dominant on the Iranian waterfront. And as a result, peace, tranquility, trade and relations were
Everything was under the control and the region was in peace. Shahab Pars pes az Islam. Okay, this chapter refers to the story of Persian Gulf after
Historically,
the Islamic era.
we do not have a document to prove that the Arabs lived in the Persian Gulf in the pre-Islamic era. The entire region was considered the southern wing of the Persian Empire. The Arab emigration to this region began sometime after the emergence of Islam.
Very interesting.
With the emergence of Islam, the Arabs could not take the influence of the Iranians in this region. Apparently, the southern coasts of the Persian Gulf and its islands were the cradle of the caliphs. But all the administrative, national and domestic and foreign affairs, such as the past years, were in the hands of the Iranian elements. The Persian Gulf coasts were also not out of the hands of the Iranians and their influence. The Persian Gulf trade and shipping, as it was during the Sassanid era, was also managed by the Iranians. In pursuit of the rebellion of Kabari in the southern coasts of the Persian Gulf, Kazem ibn Khazaimah, who ruled in Khorasan and Kayanat, became the ruler of this region and suppressed the rebellion. He was the first Iranian who, after the attack of the Arabs, was able to gain power in that region. Kazem expelled all of Kabari from all over the Persian Gulf and Oman and took control of the region. Let's talk a little about Kabari. Kabari was one of the pioneers of the first Shiites, but later they rose to power against the Tugis and Afarmani. Then they were defeated in the Battle of Naravan and fled to the southern coasts of the Persian Gulf. For this reason, these coasts were under the occupation of Kabari. During the time of Bani Abbas, one of the Iranians from the people of the city of Ray, named Ali ibn Muhammad, known as Sahib az-Zanj, went to Bahrain and the southern coasts of the Persian Gulf in order to take revenge on the Abbasids, and there he started an uprising. He wanted the people to be inspired by this uprising and the Fuguers to take their right from the wealthy. From where he was very popular, he found many supporters and all over the Persian Gulf were inspired by this movement. This uprising, because of the name Sahib az-Zanj, became famous to the Zangians and then to the Zangians. After a while, the place of the Zanjan uprising was taken by a larger uprising called Karmatian. This uprising was also led by another Iranian named Abdullah ibn Hamdan Karmat.
خاندان قرمط صورت گرفت.
The Karmatians overthrew the Arab government in the southern coasts. Nasser Khosrow, who was returning from his trip to Mecca at that time, had seen the situation and wrote as follows. In the year 904, an Iranian man, after a series of wars, occupied Hassan, Bahrain, Oman and Yemen and formed a large state for himself. The Karmatians chose the city of Hassan as the center of power and turned it into a beautiful and large city. They were also able to occupy Mecca and ruled for about 150 years on the southern coasts of the region, including ابوموسی. For 150 years, the southern region of Iran was in the hands of the Karmatians, who were also Iranian. A few years later, Alabuya came to power in Iran. Alabuya had a good relationship with the Karmatians, and with their help, they occupied Oman in the year 329. Throughout the reign of Alabuya, the rulers of the southern coasts were all Delamites who had Iranian influence. The reign of Alabuya lasted 102 years in that region, and Oman and the southern coasts of the Persian Gulf, along with Algeria, were the territory of the Persian Kalamruk. With the occupation of the Persian Atabaks, the southern coast of the Persian Gulf and its Algeria came under the rule of this series. In the year 615 Khurshidi, Abu Bakr Sa'd ibn Zanji marched against Bahrain, and the ruler of that region, who had been undeclared, gave a decisive defeat. Then he made Fardi the ruler of Bahrain on his own. In the year 623, parts of eastern Arabia were also subject to the decree of Abu Bakr. In the year 623 Khurshidi, Abu Bakr called the government of Hormuz and Oman to his nephew Rokneddin Mahmud. Rokneddin ruled this region for 35 years, and after his death, 4 of his sons became his successors. During this period, a difficult war broke out between Rokneddin's sons and the mules. In the end, the mules were defeated and the Persian Gulf government fell to the hands of one of Rokneddin's sons, named Qutbeddin Tahampton, whom Ibn Battuta praised a lot in his own travelogue. Qutbeddin ruled the southern coasts of Iran until the last year of his rule, I-724 Khurshidi, without any interference. After his death, his son Turanshah became his successor. Turanshah was also the ruler of the southern coasts of the Persian Gulf until the time of his death, I-757 Khurshidi, including Bahrain and Qatif. Turanshah was one of the emperors of Kiratman and the artist Hormuz, and he wrote the history of his successors in a book called Shahnameh. Although the emperors of Hormuz were always proud of their independence and did not know much about Iran, but mostly compared to Saladin and the emperors of Persia and Cairo, they were modest and generous. After a while, the Timurians took power in Iran. The rulers of Hormuz also came under the rule of the Timurian government and became the exporters of the Timurians. The export of Hormuz and its goods, including Sabahal and the Persian Gulf, was 300,000 dinars at this time. In this order, from 757 Khurshidi to the fall of the Timurians, the kings of Hormuz were the exporters of this government. After the Timurians, the Turkmens of Agoyolu invaded the Persian region. As a result, the kings of Hormuz exported Saliana to this government and also had power in Hormuz. Throughout the reign of the kings of Hormuz, the goods of the two sides of the Persian Gulf, from Hassan to Oman and all its islands, were in the possession of the kings of Hormuz. Up to this point, the governments were mostly Eastern and the Easterners had power in this region, until we reached the year 886, when the Portuguese Albuquerque entered the Persian Gulf. For 150 years, the goods of the Persian Gulf and its islands were in the possession of the Portuguese. According to Albuquerque, any country that has 3 points of Aden, Malaga and Hormuz in its possession is subject to world trade.
بر تجارت دنیا حاکم میشه.
You see guys, this is an incredible video. It takes us to the heart, the deepest part of the history. Let's move on to the next chapter. Portuguese appeared as Safavid and Nadir Shah. From the Safavid dynasty till Nadir Shah Afshar's
With the
dynasty.
arrival of Safavid power, all of Algeria and Sabah were again under the control of Iran.
All the islands.
In the year 980, Bahrain came out of the Portuguese occupation after a century and
از اشغال پرتغالی ها بیرون اومد
became part of the Persian province again. Then Bandar Abbas, which at that time was called Bandar Gambru, was freed from the Portuguese occupation. In the year 1001, the islands of Hormuz and Keshem fell into the hands of Shah Abbas, and the Portuguese and Spanish domination of the Persian Gulf was once again suppressed.
I believe he is
In the same year,
third king of
Imam
Safavid
Ghali Khan,
dynasty.
the leader of the Iranian Rashid, occupied Oman. At the same time, Ras al Khaimah, under the rule of one of the Iranian leaders, came under the name of Nasreddin. The occupation of the island of Hormuz by Shah Abbas caused a very interesting event to take place in this region. After the Europeans left, the island of Hormuz also lost its credibility and importance because this island had been under the rule of the kings of the kingdom of Hormuz since its foundation, and they had also formed a state there. In addition, Hormuz was also the center of eastern and western trade. All the ports on both sides of the Persian Gulf belonged to the small island of Hormuz. They took all the orders from this island of Hormuz. That is, Oman, Bahrain, Qatif, Keshem, ابوموسی, all of them were counted from the port of Hormuz. But from then on, trade from Hormuz was transferred to Bandar Abbas. Subsequently, the Safavid government also weakened. With the beginning of the Safavid uprising, the news that had taken power in Oman was finally exploited by the insurgents inside Iran during the reign of King Sultan Hussein. And they took over the islands of Keshem, Larak, Hormuz, and Bahrain. What encouraged a lot of news was the Ottoman and Huttukian incitement. The Huttukians were also in the Khorasan region. It is unlikely that this incident will happen. A cunning man like Merve, who had lived in Isfahan for a while and was aware of the unfavorable conditions of the Safavids, tried to unite the opposing groups of the government against the Safavids. Especially since the Safavid government was Shiite and the people of the region had no good relationship with the Safavids. In this order, 3 Sunni religious forces, namely the Huttukians from Khorasan, the News from Oman, and the Ottoman Turks, occupied Iran from 3 regions. And each occupied a part of Iran. But it didn't take long for Nader, the son of Shamshid, this Iranian man, to appear. After the Huttukians and the Ottomans were expelled, Nader sent an army under the command of Latif Khan of Dariabaji to Bahrain. Bahrain, which had temporarily been out of Iran's control since the year 1113, was once again occupied by the Persians in the year 1115. Bahrain became the territory of the Persian region. Later, Latif Khan used the order of Nader Shah to occupy Muscat and Ras al Khaimah. During this period, the Iranians changed the name of Ras al Khaimah and changed its name to Julfar. The reason for this was Nader Shah's soldiers' tents being sent to the slopes of the hills by the coast. Nader Shah took action to create a naval force in the Persian Gulf. He placed Gasher as the base of the naval force in the Persian Gulf and named this hill, which at that time was only a village, the Hill of Nader. In this hill, institutions and directions were created for the Iranian naval force. And Abdul Latif Khan, one of the leaders of Nader Shah, became the captain of all the ships and ships of Iran.
بنادر ایران رسید.
Once again, the political and military influence of Iran was established in the southern coast of the Persian Gulf and all of Algeria. But in the sequel, we reach the tragic story of the murder of Nader Shah. With the murder of Nader Shah in the year 1126 Khurshidi, the Iranian naval force in the Persian Gulf, which Nader Shah had seen with blood, tears and tears, was taken from the shipyard to the Tabrizi factory, where all efforts were in vain. A half-finished ship was left in the valley, which was also in the mud.
و از اون همه تلاش و تکاپو یک کشتی نیمه تموم در اسکله باقی موند که اون هم به گل نشسته بود.
More importantly, the murder of Nader Shah sparked a serious political upheaval that severely deteriorated the political geography of Iran. In a short period of time, the territories of Panavari were separated from the four corners of Iran, and the empire of Nader Shah collapsed. So far, we have learned that from the beginning of history to the middle of the 18th century, not only all the islands of the Persian Gulf, including Tum, Kachik, Bozorg and ابوموسی, which were also under the control and influence of Iran, in some of the maps of the 18th century, there was no indication of the ownership of Iran over these three islands, which does not mean that Iran did not have those islands in those years. Rather, the reason was that the three islands in those years had fallen from the sky and had not even been taken into account by historians and globalists in the 18th century. No government was looking for these islands. No one had touched them in those years. But they were still under the rule of Iran. In all the long periods of history, except for a short period of the Arab attack and the Portuguese invasion, the traditional Iranian security, which was far from the trajectory of the sea and the coastline, and was more dependent on trade, existed in this region.
British appeared in Persian Gulf.
Well, I hope you are not tired. So far, we have learned about the history of the three islands of the Persian Gulf, but our main story begins here. From here we understand why these islands were so important and were at war with each other. That is, from the post-Nader Shah era. After Nader Shah, Karim Khan's wife came to power. Karim Khan also had control over all the islands of the Persian Gulf. But Karim Khan, with the Arab intervention in the northern parts of the Persian Gulf, this had a reason. The reason was that the Arab tribes supported Karim Khan's capture of Zand. Such a move by Karim Khan caused the Arab tribes, especially the Javasim tribe, which are famous for Casimia, to gain power in both parts of the Persian Gulf. Let me also explain the origin and lineage of Casimia. On the basis of the origin and lineage of Casimia, researchers have different opinions. Some refer to Casimia's lineage and identity to the region of Syria, Hejaz, and even Yemen, and some refer their origin to the region of Lar in the Persian province, which later became part of Oman and became famous for Casimia. Anyway, in the 18th century, Casimia in the Persian Gulf, they settled from Dubai to Ras Al Khaimah. During that time, Casimia spent their lives sailing boats. On this land, the most famous historical document is related to Vadala, the French consul, who was captured by the pirates of the sea and later killed. Vadala writes as follows. Recently, the active leaders of Persia were lost. Most of them were criminals, and the tyrants were always afraid of death and forced them to pay heavy taxes and expenses. Likewise, the Qasimis bought and sold black people and the wealth of the inhabitants of the Persian Gulf.
همچنین قاسمی ها به خرید و فروش سیاهان و تاراج اموال ساکنان خلیج فارس می پرداختند.
Of course, we must say that the people of Iran did not call these people pirates, and their relationship with them was not bad. That is, the relationship between the people of Iran and Casimia was good, but the Europeans had a lot of problems with Casimia, and the British put the title of the pirate of the sea on the current ruler of the emirate. The reason was that these local people fought against the important foreigners in the region. For this reason, the Qasimis became famous for the pirates of the sea, and they even called the country of the current emirate the pirate coast of the sea. After a while, they gained power and became famous for the support of the Wahhabis in Arabia. Let's go back to the end of the Safavid period. There are some points that we should mention here. With the fall of the Safavid, the Qasimids were also present. During that period, the Qasimids took advantage of the opportunity, and for the first time in 1105, they occupied the island of Kishim. And they transferred trade from Bandar Abbas to this port. When Nader Shah came to power, he expelled the Qasimids from Iran. Iran regained its territorial unity again, and all the Iranian islands in the Persian Gulf came under the rule of Iran. After the death of Nader Shah, Karim Khan was very friendly with the Qasimids. Even Karim Khan gave the leadership of Bandar Lengar to Sheikh Saleh, the leader of the Qasimid sect. After Karim Khan, the Zandi government was overthrown by Aga Muhammad Khan. During the time of Aga Muhammad Khan, the country was in the middle of political and military crises in the north and the Kafkas region. Aga Muhammad Khan also paid more attention to suppressing the Ottomans and Russia, so that he could cut off the hands of the Ottomans and Russia from Iran. It was because of these wars that there was not much time to pay attention to the southern areas, especially the Persian Gulf. Mr. Muhammad Khan appointed Bandar Lengar as the religious leader of Oman. Following a series of incidents, the Qasimites, who had left Bandar Lengar, returned there once again, and with the approval of the Persian governor, they became the officials of Bandar Lengar and its islands. It was during this period, the 18th century, that the British capital was gradually found in the Persian Gulf.
Their appearance,
The British had control
was
of
a game
India,
changer.
and for the security of the sea and the ease of trade, they also needed the Persian Gulf. The British government extended its presence in the Persian Gulf for various reasons since the year 1198, and practically dominated this region. In all the past centuries, especially the last century, the world's economic powers, in order to achieve their desirable goals, paid special attention to the seas, hills, and islands. The British also knew very well how important these sea routes were. They even had a principle in mind for themselves, and they knew that all the seas of the world, including the Persian Gulf, were part of the Great British Empire.
took over the entire world.
Since the 17th century, the British, with the expansion of their economic influence, were able to completely dominate India. They established the East India Company, and then, with the idea of colonization, they came to the Persian Gulf, especially to Iran. The British set up a number of branches in the region, especially in the Middle East, with the aim of expanding the British naval forces' control over the waters of this region. In the year 1178, they sent their representative, Sir John Malcolm, to the Qajar king of Qajar. Their goal was to get permission from Fahd Ali Shah to build a military base on the island of Keshim. Fahd Ali Shah opposed this request, and then tried to expropriate the island of Keshim from Iran, which was also opposed by the king. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the expropriation of the land of a country by another country was not a strange thing, and it usually happened a lot. When the British came to Daribastikor, they used a trick. They claimed that the island of Keshim belonged to the Sultan of Muscat. In the end, they built a base in the western part of the island of Keshim and said that it was done in accordance with the Sultan of Muscat and had nothing to do with Iran. In the year 1189, the British criticized the total settlement with the Iranian government. Sir Harford Jones, the British Prime Minister in Iran, had a special role in this settlement. He was able to convince the court of Iran and Fahd Ali Shah to accept this settlement with bribery and subversive actions. I will read some of this settlement to you as follows. Whenever, with the permission of the King of Iran, some of the British tribes entered the Persian Gulf and set foot on another island or province, they would never have any intention of occupying the island. And from the date of the settlement, these tribes would be under the command and instructions of the King of Iran, and some of the tribes would be appointed in an agreement. But if the tribes of Fogzikr set foot on the island of Kark or other islands, the behavior of the local rulers should be friendly and sincere with these tribes. And a royal decree should be sent to the Persian government in order to give them any amount of tribute they need in exchange for the payment of a fair price per day. A few years after this settlement, a formal settlement was signed. The British tried to influence Iran's influence in the Persian Gulf as far as possible with such a contract. These agreements caused the British to easily invade Iran's ports and markets. But the most important goal of the British was still to gain more control over India. India, which was the British's largest conspiracy. Between the years 1809 to 1812, Banadir and the Isles of Iran were home to various types of sea thieves, and there was no security in the region. The British also took advantage of this issue and extended their influence in the Persian Gulf every day on the pretext of suppressing sea thieves. The British suppressed the sea thieves and then took over the regional operations of the Persian Gulf. In addition, they signed a treaty with these traders in order to undermine Iran's power and influence in the region. In the year 1199, the British attacked Banadiri Lenj and other areas. The result was the murder, plundering, and embezzlement of the people's money. The residents of Banadiri Lenj and other areas resisted the British. Meanwhile, Qasimi was also present in Banadiri Lenj and entered into a war with the British occupying forces to defend Banadiri Lenj. During the reign of the third king of Qajar, Mohammed Shah, and following the emergence of the issue of Herat, the British used the Persian Gulf to pressure the Iranian government. Let me give a brief explanation about the story of Herat. What was the story and issue of Herat during the reign of Mohammed Shah of Qajar? The story was that the ruler of Herat, Kamran Mirza, was complaining about Iran's obedience and was busy in Khorasan. Mohammed Shah decided to suppress Kamran Mirza and return Herat to the soil of Iran. For this reason, he marched to that area. The British knew that Herat's return to Iran was a great threat to their power in India. For this reason, they opposed the Iranian government. Mohammed Shah did not pay attention to these warnings of the British and became the ruler of Herat. Herat was besieged for 2 months and finally the ruler of Herat, Kamran Mirza, decided to surrender.
But
the British government did not know about this matter. The British intervened and, with financial and military aid, Kamran Mirza was exempted from this task. After a while, the British ships occupied the island of Kark and threatened to draw the war to Persia and Oman, forcing Mohammed Shah to retreat. On the other hand, the Ottoman ruler of Baghdad also attacked Khurramsher and was close to a war between Iran and the Ottomans. With the help of the Russian Middle East, these tensions broke out and the Treaty of Erzurum was signed and there was no war. After Mohammed Shah, his son Nasreddin Shah gained power. He was also opposed to the British presence in Iranian Isles and most of the work of the country was entrusted to his first minister, Emir Kabir. In addition to political and military issues, the British also had another excuse for their presence in the Persian Gulf. That was the sale of goods. They also transported goods from different parts of the world and sold them. The British also had a goods business.
They were doing
The
slavery.
British transferred a
British
large
were
number of goods from different
selling
parts
the
of the world
slaves
to the Persian Gulf on various grounds.
Persian Gulf.
Many experts believe that one of the weak points of Amir Kabir's appointment is this issue. That is, when the British were able to force Iran to sign the agreement to reach the Persian Gulf by deception and under heavy pressure. This was done during the reign of Amir Kabir, that is, in the year 1229. Of course, we must also say that Amir Kabir tried very hard to reduce the amount of influence of this agreement. But there was no success. And in the Treaty of Paris, this agreement was renewed and the British had the right to reach the Persian Gulf in 10 years. Now, if you have any questions about the Treaty of Paris, let me give you a brief explanation about the Treaty of Paris. Nasser al-Din Shah, like his father, was in pursuit of annexing the Persian Gulf to the Iranian soil. The British intervened again and did not let this happen. A treaty was signed in Paris this time. At the end of this treaty, the Iranians pledged to withdraw their military forces from the Persian Gulf and, on the other hand, to give a series of privileges to the Sultan of Muscat, who was an ally of the British. The British also pledged that it would no longer support the opposition of the opposing government and would not give up the opponents of the Shah at the embassy of this country. In fact, the British, with the intervention of parts of southern Iran, including Banadari Karamshir, Bashir, and Sagana Islands, forced Nasser al-Din Shah to accept the Treaty of Paris until the year 1234. And Iran, on the other hand, closed its eyes to Herat.
Herat is now part
Herat
of
joined Afghanistan and Iran officially recognized the country in the name of Afghanistan. Amir Kabir, during his short term as Prime Minister, tried to reduce the influence of the British and the Russians. On the other hand, for the first time, he opened the feet of America to Iran's issues. Even in the year 1228, a treaty was signed between Iran and the United States in Istanbul, a friendly and diplomatic pact that allowed the Americans to freely travel in the Persian Gulf and expand their influence in the region. At that time, Iran looked at the issue of the Persian Gulf very simply. In order to get rid of a superpower, the British allowed another superpower to influence the region, and they took power in the region. In order to reduce the historical influence of Iran in the region, the British placed the local rulers of the Persian Gulf under their own support. Subsequently, oil was discovered in southern Iran. The British were also looking for a suitable source to burn the boats. That is, they wanted to move from coal to oil.
The occupation of Triple Islands by the British.
In the year 1218, the then Prime Minister of Iran, Haj Mirza Agassi, after observing the military operations of the British in southern Sabahal, which had taken place in Herat in response to the Iranian army's advance, officially announced that the entire region of the Persian Gulf belonged to the land of Iran. In fact, the region was officially ruled by Iran, but some regions had not taken orders from the central government for a long time. The British, since then, have started the Iranian strategy in the Persian Gulf with the crazy speech of Haj Mirza Agassi. Then they were able to bribe the rulers of the region and urge them to declare independence and not take orders from the central government. One of those regions was Bandar Abbas. The governor there was a man named Sheikh Yusuf. Sheikh Yusuf took up arms and intended to separate Bandar Abbas from Iran. Neither Amir Kabir nor Haj Mirza Agassi were able to re-establish Bandar Abbas under the rule of the government. It is unbelievable that Bandar Abbas knew himself apart from the land of Iran for 19 years. In the end, it was during the reign of Mirza Aga Khan Nuri that the Iranian military force entered Bandar Abbas. After a bloody battle, Sheikh Yusuf was defeated and Bandar Abbas regained control of the government.
These are all
In 1264, Prince Mohammed Mirza, one of Nasir al-Din Shah's sons, was appointed governor of Persia. At the same time, the country's divisions also changed and a new political and administrative system emerged. According to this system, Iran was divided into 37 states. The 26th state included Algeria and the Gulf of Persia. At this time, Mohammed Mirza, the governor of Persia, had the Qasimi government in the city of Bandar Ilangar on the commanding level and appointed Haji Ahmad Khan as the governor of the region. As a result, the Qasimi's government in Bandar Ilangar fell apart, and Bandar Ilangar came under the full command of the Iranian government. The flag of Iran fluttered over the borders of Bandar Ilangar, Kark, ابوموسی, and the island of Syr. The British protested against this move and officially announced that the Qasimis had a sovereignty over Bandar Ilangar. Iran did not calm down and issued a statement against the British claim. The statement was, in short, that this Algeria was for Iran from the beginning and will forever be for Iran.
Who are you to decide for the
Until
ownership
yesterday,
of those
we
lands?
did not know the need to raise the flag of Iran in this Algeria. But from now on, the flag of Iran will soar across the Persian Gulf.
British was deciding for
The British had
everybody.
repeatedly pressured Iran on the island of Sagana. Nasir al-Din Shah also had a map in his possession, which belonged to Lord Curzon. Lord Curzon had accompanied this island along the coast and had given it to Nasir al-Din Shah. According to this map, the ownership of the island of Sagana has always been with Iran and had nothing to do with the local sheiks or the British. Getting closer to the late 19th century and the British's concern about taking over Russia and their presence in the region, all of this led the British to think ahead. But the Roghavs were not only British and Russian. During this period, the Germans were also looking for influence in the region.
Germans appeared.
The Germans entered the border and traded ships and sea goods. They established a total of companies in southern Iran, and the work got to the point where in 1897, the Germans established a consulate in Bushehr. The British knew that the Germans' entry into the region was a major threat. The British then introduced Kuwait as its own support. This move caused the German authorities to protest. At that time, the Germans were establishing a joint railway line with the Ottoman Empire.
Baghdad railway line.
The Germans knew Kuwait as part of the Ottoman Empire. The British were also pressuring the Ottomans to stop cooperating with the Germans. The Germans officially announced that the British government did not officially recognize Kuwait. The Germans then instigated the Ottomans not to give up on the British and to establish their forces in Kuwait as soon as possible. With the German support, the Turks set out for Kuwait. This move was carried out along the sea, and the Ottoman and British naval forces formed a word chain. But the British forces were stronger and stronger. The Turks could not compete with the British. For this reason, they were defeated and forced to retreat. With the defeat of the Ottomans, the Germans withdrew from the encounters in the Persian Gulf. The competition in the Persian Gulf was once again in the hands of the British and the Russians. Since the time of Fahd Ali Shah, Russia had dominated the Persian Gulf. Russia was able to sign many cooperative and commercial agreements with the Iranian government due to the large number of Russian imported clothes to Iran, which the Indian population no longer had in Iran. India, which was the permanent colony of the British, and this move was a fatal defeat for the British government. The British put their own situation in grave danger. Their trade had decreased. The German foot was slowly opening up to the region. Russia had taken power in the Persian Gulf. Even the French had also found their head and were looking for a base in Oman.
Everybody was there.
The British decided to prove to their European rivals, without paying attention to Iran and its ownership of the Persian Gulf, that it was still the king of the region. The British were supposed to put their own flag in a few islands and not give any importance to Iran or the rulers of the region on the grounds of using those islands. The islands were chosen. The British's chosen islands were these three islands: Big Tun, Little Tun, and ابوموسی.
Just look at the audacity of British. They were claiming everywhere under their own name. Okay, now we are taking back the islands.
In the early 1903s, the British occupied the three islands of ابوموسی, Big Tun, and Little Tun. In the past, due to the geopolitical value of the Persian Gulf and its islands, the British, in a sea battle with Russia, took the Shahab of Persia as part of the political capital of India.
They were considering
They knew this region as part of a conservative district around their largest capital, India. From an economic point of view, the value of trade in the Persian Gulf was so important that if the British lost this economic position, it would have a very devastating impact on the world power. On the grounds of the importance of this region to the British, the best source is Lord Curzon's memoirs. In 1903, he met with Arab leaders in the region. Lord Curzon wrote in his memoirs as follows: "Many have asked why the British are still continuing their power struggle in the Persian Gulf. The great empire of India, which is our duty to defend it, is almost at your doorstep. We have set you free from being conquered by our neighbors, who will not abandon the victorious steps of a century. Your independence will continue, and the influence of the British will remain in the best possible way." Of course, they were all deceitful. They never supported the rise of the Arab region, and they only did this so that these sheiks would always have problems with the central government of Iran. The Nasir al-Din Shah's government did not calm down, and since 1905, an offensive policy against the presence of British forces in the Persian Gulf has been implemented. Iran was so angry with the British. "Our benefits are not less than yours. At present, we do not have the military capability to attack the British, but if we did, we would not hesitate for a moment. We are standing by this water, but we do not have the permission to touch this water." The British also ordered the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah in response to these Iranian executions to put his flags in the hands of the great and small ابوموسی and own these three islands. In 1904, the Iranian authorities traveled to these three islands, lowered the flags of Shahrijar, and installed the flags of Iran. The British were very angry with this action of Iran. The British authorities sent a letter to the central government.
Invading my country, and on top of
They
it,
believed that they should
become
have taken
angry.
Iran's side from the very beginning, and that if not, Iran would not only regain the Isles of Sagana in the near future, but would also claim more rights from the Persian Gulf, and most of the Merverite and the Isles of the region would fall into Iran's
All
hands.
what it is, the pearls. The pearls
After these
business
claims,
in
a very
Persian
serious
Gulf.
negotiation took place between Iran and the British. Iran was by no means ready to back down, and would take these three islands as part of its own land. In the end, no one on either side was supposed to install a flag on these three islands.
پرچمی در این سه جزیره
Once
نصب
again,
نکنند.
another dirty
Iran acted on its commitments,
politic of British.
but the British, after a while, and the water from Asia fell, reinstalled the flags of Sharijar on these three islands. Muzaffar-ed-Din Shah showed resistance to this move and said, "We took our flag down out of kindness, but the British intend to leave Iran's eternal soil to foreigners. We will never cross our own rights." As a result of the events that eventually ended in the hands of the British, what happened? A constitutional revolution took shape in Iran, and the whole country was engulfed in an internal war. Iran's internal war gave the British and its allies the best chance. They also easily occupied these three islands. During the revolution and the internal war, the country became extremely weak, and there was no possibility of returning to the islands. Then the First World War broke out, and Iran was occupied by foreigners from the north and south. 9 million people in Iran, due to the occupation of foreigners, lost their lives. In the year 1908, the British completely occupied the three islands, and even took their own flag by force.
British is not.
During the Ahmad Shah era, the situation had calmed down to a certain extent, but the government's weakness, the government's lack of demand, did not allow the British to take control of the region. The Iranian authorities and people had not yet forgotten that these three islands were part of the country's land, and had to return to Iran. Between 1923 and 1929, Iran wrote letters to the international community several times and complained to the British that the sooner this occupation was over. Of course, there was no solution, and the international community did not give any importance to Iran's request. The British continued to tighten their grip. In 1930, they took their own flag to the coast of the Isle of Aras, which was part of the British Empire. During this period, the return of the three islands was unlikely. This situation continued until the year 1347. In this year, the British officially announced that until the year 1970, that is, the year 1350, they would leave the Persian Gulf forever.
British got used to colonization and invasion.
The British no longer had the ability to control the region. Again, very complicated negotiations began between Iran and the British until the signing of the Persian Gulf was finalized after the British. These negotiations lasted 3 years, and the person of Mohammad Reza Shah was pressuring the British government to accept Iran's conditions. Mohammad Reza Shah announced that if the issue was not resolved through negotiations, he would forcefully return these three islands to Iran.
That's the only option.
At first, the British did not take Mohammad Reza Shah's efforts seriously and only threatened these words. In order to prove that he was not joking with the British, the Shah ordered the Army Air Force to fly to the skies of the three islands and to the British military base in Shelley.
He ordered open fire.
After
to
years, the British finally realized that Iran's intentions for these three islands were really serious.
Of course, those are part of Iran.
As a result, on the morning of September 9, 1350, just one day before the British officially left the Persian Gulf, they reached a critical point. On this day, based on the agreements that had been made with the Sharia and Ras al-Khaimah sheikhs, the Iranian military forces moved towards each of the three islands and occupied all the key points of these three islands. At the end of 80 years of the British colonial era, this was the end of
British ruling Persian Gulf.
Iran's first flag was sent to the first island less than 35 minutes after the start of the operation.
بر اولین جزیره افراشته شد.
At 8 a.m. on the island of Hars, the flag of Iran was fired and
پرچم ایران به اهتزاز در
Finally,
21
got rid of
cannonballs were fired to
British
mark the
flag
victory.
in those islands.
شلیک شد. اما این
But how did these three islands become free? The conquest of the island of ابوموسی, due to the harmony that had been established with the Sharia sheikhs, was not a difficult task. The Iranian forces arrived at 6:15 a.m. and set foot on the western part of the island in a hovercraft.
در قسمت غربی جزیره پیاده شدند.
Then they advanced towards the critical points and gained altitude.
ارتفاعات رو به دست گرفتند. نیروهای
The Iranian military forces quickly sent the first flag of Iran to the highest point of this island, that is, Mount Halva. But the story of the return of the cavalry is somewhat different.
حدودی متفاوته.
At 6 a.m. on the big cavalry, the Iranian forces and Sea Force helicopters spread out the flags in the area and asked the independent forces not to resist the Iranian army.
و از نیروهای مستقر خواستند که در مقابل ارتش ایران مقاومت نکنند.
One step later, the Iranian forces set foot on the island. At 6:35 a.m., the Air Force jets flew over the island.
بر فراز جزیره به پرواز در اومدند.
At first, there was no resistance against the presence of Iranian forces on the island, until a group of Iranian forces, led by Sergeant Suzanchi, arrived at the police station opposite the island. Four of the Iranian leaders, named Sarvan Suzanchi, Habibullah Kariri, Ayatollah Khani, and Ali Qurbani Ruzbahani,
و علی قربان روزبهانی
set out to negotiate with the police station.
به سمت پاسگاه به راه افتادند. اما چند
But they had not gone a few steps forward to capture these four people. As a result of this deadly shooting, Khani, Kariri, and Suzanchi were martyred,
کهریری و سوزنچی به شهادت میرسند.
and Ali Qurbani Ruzbahani was severely injured.
مجروح میشه. در نتیجه
As a result of this decisive action, the Iranian soldiers who were on the island fired at the military base. With the death of 4 police officers and the injury of the rest of the people, this base fell into the hands of the Iranian forces.
دست نیروهای ایرانی افتاد.
A few hours later, the resistance of the rest of the leaders of the camp in the big tower collapsed, and the big tower completely fell into the hands of the Iranian forces. At that moment, very good news arrived from the small tower. A few minutes earlier, the small tower had been completely occupied by the Iranian forces. In this order, with the martyrdom of 3 members of the naval force, this island, after 80 years of occupation by the British forces, returned to the hands of Iran.
دوباره به آغوش ایران برگشت.
But the Emirate has never been short of its claims about the ownership of this island.
هیچ وقت کوتاه نیامده.
After the revolution, the Emirate government repeated the same claim of the Shah's time, which has not been resolved to this day. And the officials of Iran announced that the island of Sigan will remain part of Iran's territory forever. We have described the story, but we must reach a point. Why are these islands so important to both sides? Even though they are small islands and the countries in the Persian Gulf are rich in oil resources, why do they have so much war on these islands? The story goes back to the geography of Iran. Iran currently has 50% of one of the world's most important strategic banks, namely the Hormuz Bank. This bank accounts for half of the Persian Gulf. The islands of ابوموسی, Tund Bozor, and Tund Kauchik are 3 of the 6 Iranian islands that are known as the Qusi Islands. The importance of these islands is due to their military position and as a defensive pillar for the Hormuz Bank. The northern province of the Hormuz Bank is for Iran, and its southern province is under the control of Oman. Therefore, these islands are more important to Iran than anything else in terms of military. We must also say that, given the geographical location, these islands are important to defend Iran, not other countries in the Persian Gulf. The interesting point here is that the Persian Gulf is very shallow and all its routes are not suitable for navigation. Its deep part is the same part of Iran. For this reason, most commercial vessels pass through this part. Apart from defense, most of Iran's islands are a very good source of red soil, which has a high cost in different industries. Also, the local people of these islands are engaged in the fisheries and cultivation of aquarium fish and coral and sponge, which is also part of the capital of that region. We have mentioned all of these, but one of the most important elements in these islands is oil. These islands are oil rich. 45% of the world's crude oil passes through the Hormuz Bank. About 65% of these islands have all the oil and 30% of the world's natural gas. In other words, most of these reserves are in these three islands in the Persian Gulf. Another interesting point is that the only way in and out of the international waters of the Persian Gulf, and vice versa, is to pass through these three islands. As we said a few minutes ago, the depth of other areas is small and the best route to navigate in the Persian Gulf is the Hormuz Bank. It is no exaggeration to say, based on the explanations we have given, that any country that has these three islands in its possession will undoubtedly become the ruler of the indisputable waters of the Persian Gulf.
That is the main reason that they want to take those islands from Iran. But they're gonna stay for Iran forever. After 2 days taking back the islands, on the 2nd of December 1971, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, Sharjah, Fujairah, Al-Quwain, Ras al-Khaimah, and Ajman City, they became united and they created the United Arab Emirates. National Day of the UAE, the 2nd of December 1971. This is the hovercraft day that took Iranian soldiers to the Great Tomb. Sheikh Saqqar, from the sheikhs of Sharjah, when he was welcoming the Iranian Navy. Sheikh Saqqar. And the flag of Iran on all three islands, raising the flag of Iran. Deep Podcast, Majid Gholami, Ashkan Hafizi and Arman Hafizi. You guys are amazing. This is one of the greatest historical videos that I've ever seen. And for that, I am wholeheartedly grateful to Deep Podcast. Well guys, that's it. As I told you, this became a long reaction video. And if you have seen the video till this moment, it means that you pay attention to the history and you are an incredible person to know and spend your time to know the history, guys. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed watching it just like I did, you already know what to do. Hit that like button, and if you are new to my channel, do me a huge favor and hit the subscribe button. I want you to stay safe wherever you are. I'll definitely catch your next reaction videos and peace.